Mental health is something I think we've all become much more aware of over this past year with everything that we've gone through.
COVID created the sort of perfect storm of conditions.
There's so much shame when people feel alone in their own mental illness.
It's really seen as a very taboo topic.
I didn't understand what was happening because I was only 5 years old.
How many friends do you know that are in this type of situation that would actually talk to an adult about it?
I just don't really think people would ever bring that up to an adult.
It's never too early, but it can be too late.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm Myra Arthur. Stress and anxiety, a part of our lives before the coronavirus pandemic. But what we've all endured over the last year certainly took those conditions to some new heights. Paired with the stressors over the virus itself, then later the vaccine, it is fair to say that our emotions have been put to the test. As one of our panelists puts it, we are coming out of this as changed people, and in some cases that is a good thing. The conversation about mental health was brought to the forefront in the past year and is no longer the taboo that many may have perceived it to be, but we need to keep up that momentum. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, making it the perfect time to continue this conversation, and that's exactly what we are doing here this evening. For this KSAT Community Mental Health Town Hall, I'll be asking your questions, as well as some of our own, to our panel of experts, each a CEO with their various organizations. We're proud to be joined tonight by Tally Dolge of Jewish Family Service of San Antonio, Avita Maureen of Rise Recovery, Marianne Sokol of Children's Bereavement Center of South Texas, and Jessica Knutson with the Clarity Child Guidance Center. On your screen right now, information for each of these services that our panelists represent. We've also listed the number for the National Suicide Prevention Hotline, which you can access 24/7. We'll share this contact information for these resources throughout our conversation here tonight in this live stream. So let's get things going. Thank you all to our panelists for being here with us this evening. These conversations are always so enlightening and important because so many people can identify with issues with their own mental health that perhaps they have not thought about before. So I want to start by just talking about what mental health is. Tally, I'll pose this first question to you. So many misconceptions and myths about what it means to be mentally healthy. So just give us an overview of how we should be thinking about mental health.
I think the simplest way that we could look at mental health is that it involves our emotional, psychological, and social well-being, and it affects the way we feel and act on a daily basis. I think that when you get into mental health and wellness, with the mainstream media, they talk a lot about mental health, and then they talk about mental illness, and they put that together. And those are two totally separate things. So mental health is your mental well-being, and then mental illness is a diagnosed mental disorder like severe depression, bipolar, schizophrenia. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but just remember, it's really about who you are, your psychological and emotional and social well-being.
So there is a difference in being mentally healthy and then diagnosed mental illness. But I imagine there is something to being mentally unhealthy. Perhaps you have not been diagnosed with anything that may require certain therapies or even medications, but you can still have struggles. And Jessica, I'll ask you that. What would being mentally unhealthy look like for someone?
So to Tally's point, you can experience anxiety without having an anxiety disorder. And I think I'm using anxiety as the example because I think that's been the most prevalent thing that we've seen an increase in with the pandemic. And it might not be to the point where it's causing an impact on your life. You're still able to go to work, you're able to take care of your kids, but it's a sense of anxiety. And maybe it's an anxiety related to COVID, maybe it's an anxiety related to your kid's schooling situation. But you can definitely be mentally unhealthy without it going to the point where it's a true diagnosable mental illness. And I think that's the kind of danger zone people are in right now, where if they don't pay attention to that and acknowledge that there's an issue, it could progress into something more serious. It's Mental Health Awareness Month, as you mentioned. So at Clarity, we have the Fine campaign that we're doing this month. And there's an old therapy saying that if you're fine, you're frustrated, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. And one of the reasons we did that was just to kind of get everybody talking about how are they doing from a mental health perspective, and taking a temperature check and paying attention to it before it spirals into something else.
And Jessica, it's funny you mentioned Fine. I can't tell you how many times, you've asked somebody over the last year, how are you doing? Fine. We're doing fine, as well as can be expected with all the pressures that the last year has presented to all of us. A lot of people may think about mental health and think, well, yes, the last year's been stressful, but I haven't been affected by that. And, I've read so many different articles with various experts weighing in and sharing their thoughts on the same point, that if somebody feels like they have not been affected by what we've all been through over the last year, they need to take perhaps a closer look at how they're really doing. Adhd, I know that you with Rise Recovery deal with a lot of addiction issues, people turning to substances to try to cope with this stress. And we've actually talked to you on our KSAT Q&A at 6:30 before about how you're seeing some quote unquote first timers, people who have not dealt with those problems before, but are now turning to substances for solutions. Can you share any stories with people watching this about what some of those people who were coming to you for the first time are saying about what their struggle has looked like, maybe giving our viewers tonight something to identify with?
Sure. I think there's, you've already given me lots of things to think about, Jessica and Tally, around the importance of mental health and where substances play a part in that. I think we have found socially that it's become socially normal, especially under stress, to numb out. And that's one of those temperature check signs to look out for when you're assessing whether or not you're healthy. Do I find myself numbing out, checking out with either social media or with alcohol or with Netflix, whatever it is, more than I am present? And that's one of those red flags that you're losing your joy of the present time. And so what we've seen quite a bit is an increase in alcohol consumption. People coming from all walks of life. It is not this knows no barriers, substance addiction. And it's not always the people that you think, because it's genetic, and a lot of it plays, the other factor that plays a part is how early you start. And I think that's my biggest concern with COVID, that I serve families, and one of the biggest indicators or risks for becoming addicted or having a substance use disorder later in life is starting early, is being exposed to alcohol or drugs early. And so a stressor like this in a young person's life, in a young adult's life, might make people move closer to depending on drugs and alcohol than they ever have before. And that's what we are seeing with our young people today. We're seeing them cope with anxiety, with feelings of suicidality, with fear and agoraphobia, because they're afraid of people, of social situations, and in some ways don't know any better, because this is one of their first major milestone experiences that's taken away so much for them. So it's really important that we recognize what impact COVID has had on people's milestones, and how alcohol and drugs are being used sometimes as a very dysfunctional and unhealthy coping skill for people.
And you talk about starting at an early age, being exposed to that as a solution for stress at an early age. And I know a big question for parents has been, how are my kids handling this? And it's certainly different at different stages and ages of childhood. Marion, can you weigh in on that? Just what you've seen in children develop over this last year, maybe some things for parents to be looking for in their kids.
Well, at Children's Bereavement Center, of course, we normally deal with a lot of grief, and our focus primarily is death loss. And so we see children who are grieving, and grief it's really a normal journey, a natural journey. It's a difficult journey, but death happens. And so we see children who are angry, as we say, mad, sad, anxious, and afraid. But over the last year, it's been particularly difficult, because when you're affected by a death in particular, usually what the most comforting thing is to have people around you and to share the laughter, the tears, the love. And so during the pandemic, it's been difficult for families. They haven't felt safe hugging. And even though we tell our children things are all right, the fact that they see us with a mask on makes them feel like things are not all right. And so there are so many variables here. And of course, developmentally, we have to address those according to the child's age and try to speak with them. A lot of our teens are angry, they're frustrated, they feel, I've heard some of them say, well, I've been robbed of my high school years, especially if they're a senior this year. And to the little ones, they just don't understand. Why can't we go out and roam on the playground? Even to our center, they want to come to groups, but it wasn't safe. And so we're having them come in one by one. But there's so much hurt there because at this time, when more than any other time, they need that feeling of family and that feeling of love. We're not allowed to hug. We're not allowed to get together in large groups. And so I think it's really complicated grief. And I really think in so many ways we're all grieving what we had. Some people are saying, well, it's the new normal. I hope not. I mean, I hope we can be much more normal than we are right now. But I worry. Way too many suicides. Oh, so many. And so many children not understanding and feeling guilty that maybe they caused a suicide when in reality the world has just been too overwhelming for some people.
And I don't like the idea of a new normal either. I have heard countless people say that over the past year, and I'm with you. I hope not as well. And for all the negative that we've seen over the last year, we have come a long way. Things are certainly at a turning point. More and more people vaccinated, people who are fully vaccinated, in some cases being allowed to drop the masks, gather with others that are fully vaccinated. And that's a great thing, but in and of itself, that is creating a different kind of stressor, sort of a re-entry to a phase of normal, if you will. So, Tally, I'll ask you this, how are people dealing with that? Because as a person, you can only control your situation, your choice to get vaccinated or not, your choice to wear a mask or not. Are people struggling with how to re-enter right now?
Absolutely. I do want to say before we go into the struggle, the beautiful part of what this pandemic and this last year has brought was new awareness to mental health. And we are now talking about it in the way that it should have been talked about all along, and really looked at the same way we look at physical health and taking care of our physical health. People are asking questions. I heard, and I love Jessica's thing about fine, but people are now able to say, instead of asking, how are you? People have come out and said, hey, I'm not doing so well. I'm not doing great. So there's such an honesty and a vulnerability that this period has brought that we've needed so much in terms of human interaction. So I just want to say there is a beautiful part of what we've gotten through this last year. And as a mental health advocate and as a mental health CEO, it has really brought us to a new level of understanding and a new level of the world listening in a different way. So I just wanted to say that.
And that's what we hope to continue with, that momentum I mentioned earlier, having conversations like this, letting people know that it's okay to say, you know what, no, I'm actually not fine, and I need to address that in some way. And so as we go forward, do you have any advice for people on how to deal with this new phase in the pandemic?
Absolutely. Well, I mean, I'm going to talk for myself. And I'm going to talk right now as somebody who has a mental health disorder that has been diagnosed very young with an anxiety disorder. So coming into this pandemic, I was actually able to relate and understand about social isolation and feeling panicky and anxious at a different level. So I'm telling you, the scarier part to me is this reentry part, is now having to go back to, like we've all keep saying, this quote unquote new normal. I'm actually seeing that just having to have, real conversations in person and really having to look into somebody's eyes and really having to have a conversation right there and not over Zoom has provoked some of my anxiety. So I actually think that awareness is really the key at this point. Being aware that I'm not totally comfortable and accepting that. And also saying that this is not something we've ever been through. And so a lot of this is the positive self-talk that you can give yourself, because we're all there. We're all in the place that we're all together re-entering society in some way. So by being able to say, hey, I'm an individual, I handle things differently, things may scare me that never did before. Social anxiety is on the rise, and I think that all of my incredible panelists who are here can talk about what they see in themselves maybe, but also in their clients and in people around them, and even people who you work with. By being able to be aware and really pinpointing what's going on in your body and saying, hey, oh, it's stress, or oh, it's anxiety. Okay, and I want to do some of these things, and we'll talk about some of the breathing techniques that you can do, but awareness and then self-compassion. By being able to say to yourself, it's okay. We don't have the answers.
And if I can add to that, Tally, I think it's part of that temperature check of doing what you're comfortable doing. I mean, you touched on that, but we all have to do our own risk analysis. And that doesn't just mean risk of exposure. I think it's also risk to our mental health. You don't have to accept every in-person invite you're getting, because you're probably going to get inundated with them. My calendar is filled up with let's get back to in-person. And I realized, let's accept like half of those and kind of ease back into this. But my first instinct was to just kind of be a people pleaser and say, I'm going to accept all of these because I don't want to disappoint anybody that wants to meet in person. But it's finding that balance again, and it's going to be different for everybody. There may be folks that want to accept every invite and are, just anxious to get back to that component of their life. But we've got to do, as Tally said, that self-check and set those boundaries up as well.
And I think too, and I'm curious to hear you all weigh in on this, but extending, that compassion and grace that we're all trying to give ourselves as we take note of our mental health and this reentry, saying, you know what, no, I'm actually not comfortable with that, maybe over time, but also extending that to other people and realizing that perhaps what I'm comfortable with right now, somebody else may not be. And so it's okay for Jessica to turn down an invite to an in-person gathering, or understand that there may still be plenty of people wearing masks. I mean, how does that affect somebody else's mental health when you're seeing other people make decisions that perhaps you would not make? And Tally, go right ahead.
I mean, I think we all can answer that. At the beginning, it was terrifying. It was terrifying to go outside and see other people making decisions. But what I realized more and more during this period of time is how little control I have over things, and that I don't have control over other people's actions. And I think that's extremely important. And I will tell you that my anxiety went down because I realized that I didn't have that control. So when I stopped judging, and when I stopped looking around me and just being cognizant of my own things that I can do for myself and my immediate family, that helped tremendously. I think we spend a lot of time judging, especially right now in this world, other people, their actions, what they're doing, who they are, what they posted on social media. We have to really, really start to look at ourselves and our behaviors before we start to judge others.
And I'm curious about kids in this situation? Because as adults, we may be changing our habits, and obviously our kids are looking to us to decide how to proceed going forward. And I know that, you know, as a mom myself, my son, who's 4, has had no problem wearing a mask. He thinks it's totally fine, has to be reminded to take it off when it's appropriate. But I want to make sure, you know, obviously he's not vaccinated. Kids that young are not approved for that. So how do adults continue to protect their kids, but also make the appropriate changes they feel comfortable with and not add to confusion for kids about where we are right now in this pandemic? Whoever wants to weigh in on that. Jessica, I'll start with you.
Yeah, that's a tough question because it's it can be so personal depending on the child and their own temperament. But I think overall, kids look to us to how we're responding. And I think sometimes we think we're protecting them by not talking about things, but they know if we're anxious, and they're gonna read that, and they're gonna get anxious as well. So, you know, as age appropriate, I think we have to have honest conversations with kids. My kids are around your age, and you know, it was very basic conversations about there is a virus. That's why your teachers are wearing masks. If they were a little older, it would be having some discussions about what their preferences were as things open up, and getting them more involved in the dialogue. And maybe they still want to wear a mask and you don't. And I think it's gauging not just your own anxiety, but theirs as well, because they will absolutely play off what their parents and the other adults in their life, their teachers, their coaches, the other role models that they have, they're going to be looking to how they respond as well.
So much of this is so personal, you know, as we've already touched on, just about your comfort level right now at this point. Adhd, when it comes to kids looking to parents, I'll never forget something you said in a previous interview we did with you about how kids are looking at the way parents handle stress. And if that involves turning to alcohol, even if it's just saying, oh, I'm so stressed, I'm going to have a glass of wine or a cocktail. It's not excessive in nature. They're still getting to know that that's how you handle stress. Yeah, so what have you seen as far as that goes, and any advice for parents when they know their kids are watching?
I think it goes back to that. And it's not just alcohol. It's really a lot of us are overwhelmed and are using coping skills. And that's all it is a coping skill. But I think assessing whether or not this coping skill is high or low on the health scale, on the healthy scale, is this good for me long term? Am I doing this despite negative consequences? Am I spending more of my free time doing this, whether it's TikTok scrolling or drinking a glass of wine or sleeping too much, instead of being present with the people around me? Then that's a sign that you're modeling something that might be unhealthy, and that you should check yourself. Healthy is being present focused. We all need to numb out sometimes. We all need to step back and either go for a run or, you know, see one too many episodes on Netflix. But it should be short term. It should be manageable. You should be able to stop if you decide to stop. You should be able to turn it off to prioritize what's in front of you or what's interrupting you without feeling irritable. And I think another way to take care of our basic needs, it's interesting that I love acronyms, and the one that I like to encourage parents to ask themselves if they find themselves being especially irritable to their loved ones is HALT. Am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Because those are 4 common triggers for anybody to be acting in a way that they end up regretting long term if they don't check themselves. So that's a great self-awareness temperature check for parents who are trying to better manage their own moods. And then finally, ask your loved ones. If you really want to know how you're doing, a great barometer check is to ask your loved ones how they think you're doing. Do they find you moody, particularly complaining a lot, sleeping too much, not paying attention to them? I think that those. Do you have hobbies, or do they think you have none? You know, these are the kind of things that are great reflections for you to think about if you're open to feedback and want to learn more about yourself. Because it's hard. It's hard to see yourself, but your loved ones see you.
One of the sound bites that we played as we got into this live stream was somebody saying it's never too early to address mental health, but it can be in some ways too late. And that is incredibly impactful. I want to make sure that in the time we have left, we provide solutions for people. I think we all know so many of the problems, and it's not just living in the midst of this pandemic. The issue of vaccines has become divisive for some people. It's had some, forced some tough conversations among friends and family. We've also been dealing with racism in this country over the last year and how progress can be made with that very issue. Politics, that's become, even more divisive than it has been in years past. So all of that has piled on top of all of us in some way over the last year. So Adhd, I'll ask you this question again here, but I want to give people a solution. If they think, you know what, turning to alcohol or turning to some kind of substance, that's my answer. That's my relief. What's a way they can step back and find another option?
Couple things. If you find yourself mentally unhealthy, there's usually three origins of that. In my experience, it's either biological, there's a chemical imbalance that maybe you were born with or that happened in your development. There was some circumstantial, either you're ingesting drugs or trauma happened, like the pandemic, or it's a physical health issue that's meant that symptoms are showing to be more focused on something like depression can easily be a symptom of Lyme disease, for instance, a doctor is sharing with me. So checking yourself out, going to a primary doctor and sharing your honest experiences so that they can do appropriate health evaluation. That is a great first step. Check in with your primary doctor and be honest with them. And then the second thing I would say is turn outward. I think sometimes we can stew in our own agony. And so 3 questions I like to meditate on to begin my week is, who is someone I know this week that I can share an ear, a hand, an encouraging word with, and then do it? Who is someone this week that I can ask some advice from, because there's all, this week, and then who is someone this week that I can thank? And if I do those 3 things every week, I find myself much more focused on the present and the people and the things that matter to me, and less on spiraling into a mental unhealthy behavior.
All such great advice, and I imagine that a problem can start very small, but progress very quickly. Marian, I want to rope you into our conversation here. I know that you said, the Children's Bereavement Center deals with a lot of grief, a lot of loss of life when it comes to, children losing friends or loved ones. And I imagine that's certainly happened in our community because of COVID over this past year. And obviously this wouldn't compare to losing a loved one, but you talked about the loss of experience that so many kids feel as though they've been cheated out of their proms or, playing in the starting lineup for X, Y, and Z sport on their senior year. Is there a mental health solution in allowing kids to grieve that kind of a loss through all this?
We tend to focus on all the things that haven't happened, but I've seen so many creative solutions of drive-by parties and celebrations, and I think in many ways we've done a good job in some ways. It's not the same. It's certainly not the same. I think being together with family though, and family times, and finding new ways to compensate has been important. I've heard several of our dads say, this is actually the best year I've ever had as a family being together, because I worked every day otherwise and I didn't think much. So I think part of it is perspective. I believe, trying to look at the things you do have rather than not. The most difficult, I think, are those families that are really in dire economic straits right now. If a father died, and we've had this situation here, a father dies of COVID, there are 5 children, they don't know how they're going to pay the rent. We've had several single moms pass away with children in high school, and their whole future is uncertain. So, like anything else, I think starting at the level of those we love, and not just our nuclear family, but that family you choose, that family in your church or your school or your neighborhood that you can help, and trying to make a difference there. It does help by reaching out and assisting others. We can't capture the normalcy we had before in terms of school events, all the sports that they've missed, but we can still celebrate what we have. And I guess reflecting what each of the other, my really dear friends and colleagues have said, children tend to reflect how well the parents are doing, whether that's grieving a death or grieving a disappointment. And so if the family says, I've got this, then the child usually has the same attitude. We do something at the Bereavement Center, an activity for older children. We work a lot through expressive arts, but for the older children, we have trays of beautiful broken colored glass in vivid color. And we have the children look at it. These are usually the young teens. And we ask them to describe it. And they say, well, it's broken and it's sharp and it's colored. And we often say to them, that's your family right now. That's your world right now. And it's broken and the emotions are sharp and it's hot. And we talk about colors and what they mean. But after it goes through fire, it can also be something beautiful. And so they lay those people together. We put them in a kiln and they come out with a piece of fused glass that is really beautiful. And we say, that's like your family. It's never going to be the same, but it can still be beautiful.
Still be beautiful. Wow.
Yeah, just trying to be positive and find other ways to celebrate life, essentially, because life is fragile.
A positive attitude has gone a long way for a lot of people over this past year. We have some viewer questions. We made viewers aware that this was happening and took questions from them about their issues with mental health or their concerns. So one viewer sent us this question. My son did not have any mental health issues until 18 years old, and it started with seizures. Then he was diagnosed with schizophrenia and paranoia. I did not find out until my son had a mental breakdown. How do you know there are issues with mental health early on? Jessica, is that one that you can tackle?
Yeah, absolutely. And that is hard because depending on the specific diagnosis, they're not always tremendously early warning signs. Something with the diagnosis like schizophrenia, we talked to a lot of families where 16, 17, 18 is when they really first started showing the signs and symptoms of it. We refer to it as the first psychotic break. There may have been some minor warning signs, but nothing that looking back you would have predicted that would have come. So that can be a very shocking diagnosis for a family. And there are some resources, particularly through UT Health, that help a family navigate that first psychotic break because it is so traumatic to the family system. In terms of other diagnoses, depression and anxiety, those tend to show up a little bit younger in kids. And oftentimes it's there's some precursor behaviors where the kids are labeled as a problem child, or maybe they're the kids that are getting kicked out of child cares, because what happens, especially with our little ones, is they don't have the language yet to say I'm depressed and anxious. That's a pretty advanced level skill, and so often those look like temper tantrums or they look like aggression. So I think if your child is to the point where they're having those type of symptoms where it's causing difficulties in a school setting or in relationships or someone feels unsafe, it's best to start with your pediatrician to start that road to decide if that is maybe a warning sign to something more.
A lot of your questions we got have to do with mental health in kids, and I think that this one, this viewer question kind of piggybacks off of your answer, Jessica, so I'll pose this one to you again. This viewer wrote to us asking, can ADHD affect mental stability in kids?
Absolutely. It's if you don't I think, identify, diagnose, and treat the ADHD appropriately, it does have the potential to grow into, I think, an anxiety disorder, especially, but depression, because those kids tend to not do as well at school. And so much of self-esteem development and all those developmental milestones are tied into school performance. And so if we don't kind of get that identified and treated well early, it does have the potential to become something more serious.
Yeah.
Now that being said, I think ADHD in particular is potentially overdiagnosed. I think there's some kids that need some just different interventions in the school setting. But if it's a true diagnosis of ADHD, the early you can get intervention, it keeps it from progressing.
Right. The self-concept is so different. This is, the little one who can't pay attention for more than a minute, who doesn't process and can't even retain the directions that the teacher wants. And then they get to be known as the difficult child or the non-compliant or the oppositional behavior disorder, and get all sorts of labels sometimes when they really just can't focus.
Yep.
And they can't get to the cognitive learning because they're too distracted by everything else they see.
Well, I think that's really important, Marian, is to talk about the overdiagnosis as well.
Mm-hmm.
We come from a society where we want to know the answer so quickly. It's like an instant thing. So as soon as we have a diagnosis, okay, well, my kid's this and this is what it is. But that's not how it is, especially with mental health. And I think one of the beautiful things about what society's doing right now is the trauma-informed care and understanding that we need to understand the what happened to you piece as opposed to what's wrong with you. And that's a really big push in our society today, is what has happened to you, because it may not be that your child has ADHD or ADD or whatever that is. It may be that they're highly anxious, or that they're having some kind of a depressive episode, that they're not able to concentrate in school. We have to look at a bigger picture than just the diagnosis itself. So I say that to parents, and I think, Jessica, you are so wonderful and articulate, and the way you handle that. But I think that's a really hard thing in our society. We continue to really just want to diagnose, but right now, mental health is about looking at the whole person.
And Tally, I just want to follow up with that really quickly. If you have any advice, Jessica, Tally, anybody on our panel, any advice to parents whose children may have a diagnosis that they are second guessing, what should they do about that?
I would always get a second opinion. If something doesn't feel right in your gut, or you don't trust what a professional is saying, there is nothing wrong with advocating for your child and going to talk to somebody else. I think we would do that with a medical diagnosis if it was serious, and I would encourage everyone to do that with the behavioral health diagnosis as well.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
This next viewer question, more for the adults who are taking part in this live stream and viewing this at home. Something we've all dealt with over the past year, striking a balance between work life, which is now fully accessible 24/7 from the comfort of your own living room, and actually living in your living room and spending time with your family. So this person asks, how does one continue to not be overwhelmed or suffocated with the work environment and living balance? Tally, how do we do that?
Well, I think it's a very delicate balance. And I will say that I believe that partial working from home is going to be possibly the wave of the future for a lot of companies. I think there's a savings in money. So what I really want to say is that you need to take care of your mental wellness before you take care of anybody else's in your household, because you're doing them a disservice if you're not taking care of yourself. So by being able to prioritize and also set boundaries in your home can be very difficult, especially when you have young children. But if that's the case, there is going to always be 5 to 10 minutes a day that you can take to yourself. And honestly, one of the best things that I can tell you that I did during this period of time is, first of all, mindfulness exercises, and we can get you some links on doing some really good mindfulness exercises and mindfulness apps. But another thing is practicing gratitude by yourself. So it is writing in a journal every day some things that you're grateful for. I'll say that at the beginning of COVID, and when we were all locked in the house, I said, I want to do something. I need to do something because I need control, because my anxiety was out of control. So one of the things that I did was start a gratitude journal. And if you know what that is, it's just writing down some things that you're grateful for. But the kicker for me, and I am still doing it to this day, is I write down 5 things that I'm grateful for every single day, but they are not the same things. I'm not going to continue to write my family, my family, my family, my family, or I'm going to continue. No, every single day I have to make it intentional to see 5 things in this world that I'm grateful for. So I'll tell you that it's gotten me out of some pretty challenging times emotionally, by being able to look back at this last year and few months and be able to see that I was grateful during some of the hardest days. So that's,
and it can be simple. It can be a really good meal. That you're grateful for.
And mine was, I looked at a leaf blowing one day. I was like, oh, that leaf is blowing so beautifully. Like it's to the point of really looking at what's beautiful in this world. And I think we look so much, our brains actually are predisposed to go to the negative.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we're able to counteract that in some way, it's pretty powerful.
If I could share too, if you're in a supervisory position, if you have the privilege of power and influence in your company, consider taking this time where the conversation about mental health is happening to incorporate that into your own work environment. Invite various mental health nonprofits or providers to come and present about their services and resources, or a presentation about mental health in general. It doesn't just educate your team and support them, it also sees that you are acknowledging that this is a part of their health. They see that you are bringing the conversation, welcoming it into the environment, into the culture, and that it's healthy to talk about it. And I can't stress enough that mental health is health. I heard once the brain is part of the body. It is part of your health. It is not something that we only attend to at certain times when crises happen. It's something that we should be tending to the same way we tend to our heart, to our lungs, to our stomach. And remembering that for ourselves is really important, because I think we put our minds and our mental health last so often because we don't consider it part of the body.
And some of those things, some of the things that we're talking about now, there were things that are highlights of this past year, perks that we've seen, people being more open to talking about mental health and taking more inventory of the big to small things that they're grateful for. And so, Adhd, I'll ask you this question. Rise Recovery certainly deals with addiction issues, substance abuse issues. When it comes to that topic, has there been a highlight for you, what the last year has brought in terms of either raising awareness or just connecting people with resources, perhaps?
Oh, yes. The most incredible thing has been actually a part of a project that every one of our colleagues has participated in, and that's the Mobile Mental Wellness Program. We recognize that people were not coming to our sites, that kids were not able to be accessed, and they had less access than ever before because they were isolated and sheltered. And so a group of nonprofits, of mental health nonprofits, went into the schools, met these kids where they were at, and engaged them in this holistic way to serve our community, our public school students, when they most needed it, because they were not going to get it any other way. And so I'm so honored to be a part of that. Some other initiatives that have grown out of this: we have a 24-hour helpline, 210-SAY-CARE. It is specifically for substance use resources, and there will be a 24-hour answer, someone compassionate on the phone. It's not crisis intervention, it's compassion intervention. We will help you, direct you to the resources you need in Bexar County. And then finally, a recovery high school. We've opened up received Yes. The accreditation to open up our very first, San Antonio's very first recovery high school. And we're the only major city in Texas that did not have one for kids who are openly trying to address their substance use issues through recovery and want to be in an environment, a finished school in an environment that supports that. And so there's so many wonderful things happening. Yes. And I can't wait for the fall for our new enrollment, for our new students to join us. And there's just so much good happening because we are such a collaborative community. We care so much about the people we serve, and we just need to get the word out because there are about 10,000 nonprofits in San Antonio that are here and ready to serve you. You do not have to wait until you're vulnerable, until you're a vulnerable person. I think a lot of people assume I have to be a vulnerable person like I'm living on the streets. No, we are all in vulnerable positions in our life, and we are here to serve you. And so every single one of these people in this panel is ready to connect you to resources that you need.
We have so many topics to talk about in mental health, but the reporter in me wants to know more about this high school for the people who are watching this. So for anybody watching who's curious, can I get my child involved in that? What do they need to know about that school?
They need to visit www.riserecovery.org and click on the link about our recovery high school. We are enrolling right now for the fall semester. It will be located on San Pedro and Audubon for this coming year. And then we are opening a brand new campus in next year, 2022, in which we will have our recovery high school long term. We know this is a critical need for young people, especially young adults, teenagers, freshmen through senior year. We will serve them with recovery support throughout the school day, an incredible, excellent education through a charter education partnership. And then we can serve the family and we can serve that student even after school. So we can really wrap around support for those kids who are trying to make it through recovery and know that they need an environment that supports that.
What an amazing project and something that we're all going to be lucky to have here in San Antonio. RiseRecovery.org, is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, just wanted to repeat that one more time. So we have just a few minutes left in our hour, which as always, this has gone quickly. We've covered a lot, but there's certainly more to talk about when it comes to mental health and this phase of re-entry, returning hopefully to the normal that we all once knew. So as we wrap things up, I just want to ask each of you to share some final thoughts, whether it is, advice on mental health, some coping skills, what you want people to take away from this live stream. And Marian, I'll start with you.
No, I always feel that life is fragile, but it's something that we should celebrate. So I just am I'm so honored to be involved. Thank you for having us today. I strongly support the initiatives through the school, the mobile mental wellness. Our other partners are communities and schools and family service association. And if we can spread that, because we all know that people can't always get to us, but my dream and my hope is that this is a nucleus and a start of something that can reach every district. And that for families that can't get to our individual agencies, we'll have a piece of all of our entities together in one place, one stop access. So I think, again, life is fragile. We need to work together. We need to lean on each other. And I'm just glad to be a part of this. Thank you.
Well, thank you for being here. And certainly the last year, it has been key for us all to work together to get through this. Tally, how about you? Some final thoughts from you?
So I have a lot of thoughts, but I know this incredible group here know that. But my main thoughts are, first of all, if you are dealing with a mental health challenge or a family member with a mental health challenge, you are not alone. There are resources out there. That is the first thing. And there are people who are wanting to help right now. And there are low cost or no cost options for anybody in this city. And we will make sure that KSAT has that on their website. But also, tell your story. This has been a year like no other. and we all now have gone through something. And I think it's imperative that we are honest with ourselves and honest with the people around us about what we've gone through. It also takes the stigma away from mental health and from getting the care that so many people desperately need. There are so many people out there who want to listen, and if not, you will find somebody. We are all one step away, one person away from somebody who has a mental health diagnosis. So please know that. They are in your backyard, they're in your family, and it could be you. And there's no shame or guilt ever associated with that. And that's what we as a group here tonight are trying to tell you. So, and the last thing is educate yourself. There's so many incredible things and books and resources out there right now. I will tell you, if you haven't seen, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but Oprah just came out with her book, which is about asking what happened to you instead of what, I mean, how are you versus what happened to you. But there's also the piece that people are starting this conversation in a way that we never have before. And I hope that we will continue, and I want to thank KSAT for continuing the conversation on mental health and wellness and not letting it drop off, because this is here to stay. And challenges are here to stay. But if we're in this together and we are working towards a solution, that's exactly where we're supposed to be.
It's been a tough year, but we know that for whether it's our own individual circumstances or where we go as a country from here, it's not going to be the last one. So I'm glad that we're continuing this conversation. Jessica, how about you? Some final thoughts when it comes to mental health, even when it comes to mental health and kids.
So I think, we've had a lot of discussion about mental health is health. And I think to that, I think as a community, we have to look at our own response when we hear about mental health issues. The analogy I make sometimes is if, one of our families came to us and said their child had cancer, we would rally. We would bring a casserole. We would offer to take their other kids. We would wash their car. The community would rally around them. If a family comes to you and says my child was hospitalized for depression, we shut our doors. It just adds to that stigma that we don't rally around our neighbors. And, just to share some statistics with you, and Tally touched on it, 1 in 5 kids is going to have a situation that progresses to a mental health issue, maybe not a full diagnosis, but to the point where they need intervention. So we're all in these silos, not talking about it, where you might have a resource next door to you, or in your church, or in your extended family. And so we do our entire community a disservice when we don't treat this just like any other diagnosis and support each other like we would with any other diagnosis. So we just have to start with our own personal stories, as Tally said, and get the information out there.
Thanks so much for sharing that. I think it's important for us to all hear your key takeaways. So Adhd, I will turn it to you to wrap things up for us tonight. Your final thoughts.
I think if any of our viewers are deciding that or have been using substances to cope, know that there is a sober curious, a recovery movement. There are resources that you do not need to have been diagnosed with addiction to decide, you know what, this is not healthy in my life and I think I deserve better. And that's not for everybody, but for those who have experienced that feeling, there are a lot of resources out there, including Rise Recovery. And it is not a moral failing. If you do find yourself experiencing a substance use disorder, it is a mental health disorder, and which means it is a diagnosis, just like the other things we've been talking about, which means help is available and people want to help you. You are worthy of it. You do not need to be ashamed of it. And people are here to embrace you and help you to healing. So regardless of where you are on that spectrum, if you're thinking about trying a different way, a different pattern, different lifestyle, feel free to call any one of us, including Rise Recovery, and we want to be there for you.
Thank you all so much for being a part of this discussion. I am certainly not the expert here. That's why you all are here, for me to lean on your expertise and your information. But what I've taken away from this, to sum it up very quickly, is that help is out there. No matter what situation you find yourself in, help is available. There are resources. Tally, you mentioned low cost or no cost resources, which is very important depending on everyone's personal situation. Also, mental health is health. It's just as much taking care of your body as it is your brain. So thank you all again for being part of this and allowing people, I hope, to walk away from this knowing that it is not a sign of weakness. If you find yourself, whether it is a diagnosed mental illness or you just find yourself feeling mentally unhealthy, there are differences, but there is help out there for both of those things, and it's showing yourself some compassion to acknowledge that. So if anyone who is watching this would like information on the resources that these wonderful ladies provide, we have all of that listed right here on your screen. We will include this information on our website as well. You can find that at KSAT.com. Tally, Adhd, Marion, and Jessica, thank you again for your time. Let's keep this conversation on mental health going. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, Myra.
Thank you
so much, Myra. Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Good night.